Good morning. Today we are going to discuss the research work titled Hybrid CEO LMO-based Combined Economic Emission Dispatch with Renewable Energy Integration. Grid operators constantly fight a two-front war. Every hour they must calculate a dispatch schedule that minimizes the marginal fuel cost of their thermal generators while simultaneously driving down pollutant emissions. Pushing these numbers down requires strict adherence to physical reality. The total generation must exactly match the system demand without exception, and no individual generator can be pushed beyond its physical operating limits. To navigate these rigid boundaries, traditional optimization models often rely on artificial penalty factors. They evaluate infeasible schedules and penalize them mathematically, guessing at constraints. The study we are analyzing takes a different path. It demands strict mathematical feasibility from the very first calculation. This distinction matters because modern grids are no longer static. When variable renewable sources like solar and wind are added to the mix, they act as must-take power, rapidly shrinking the net demand required from thermal units. As the operating margin tightens, keeping the power grid stable becomes a complex problem of dynamic load optimization. To solve this combined economic emission dispatch challenge, the researchers built a highly specialized workflow. It begins with the raw data from a standard IEEE 30-bus system, integrating both the baseline thermal capacities and the incoming variable renewable generation. These inputs are fed into a normalized objective function. Because cost and emissions operate on vastly different scales, dollars per hour versus kilograms per hour, the model normalizes them to prevent one metric from completely masking the other. This normalized data is then handed to the algorithmic brain of the model, a hybrid search utilizing cosmic evolution optimization and logarithmic mean optimization. Here is where the artificial penalties are discarded. After every update cycle, the algorithm runs a projection-based feasibility check. It mechanically forces every candidate solution back inside the boundaries of the grid's physical limits. Only then does the workflow yield its final output, a mathematically sound and highly optimized generator dispatch schedule. By locking these steps into an unbroken sequence, the algorithm ensures the system never wastes time evaluating impossible scenarios. Every evaluated solution is physically viable. The parameters are locked to standard benchmark data. The topology maps to the IEEE 30-bus system, relying on 6 thermal generators. All quantities are expressed on a base power of 100 MVA to keep calculations proportional. The costs and emissions are calculated directly in per-unit domains using classical quadratic equations. Cost is determined by fuel coefficients, while emissions are mapped using independent quadratic factors for each specific generator. To measure these two competing goals equally, the model sets fixed normalization weights. Weight 1 for cost and weight 2 for emissions are both locked to a value of 1. And the computational limits are equally strict. The optimizer is constrained to a population size of 50 candidate solutions and is given a maximum limit of exactly 120 iterations. At every iteration, the population of 50 splits. 60% undergoes cosmic evolution optimization, pushing outward to broadly explore the global space. The remaining 40% uses logarithmic mean optimization, constructing target factors to rapidly refine local peaks in the data. If any of these candidates drift outside the operating boundaries of the generators, the model executes its projection step. Instead of attaching a penalty score, it mathematically snaps the infeasible solution directly onto a capped simplex, a geometrical space representing the exact maximum and minimum limits of the 6 generators. Immediately after this projection, the model enforces elitism, preserving only the best-performing candidates. Because this happens directly after boundary correction, the entire population becomes highly biased toward perfectly feasible operating regions. Let's observe how the algorithm handles a heavy load. Case I establishes a baseline thermal-only dispatch with 0 renewable energy input. The total system demand is set high at 283.4 megawatts. This chart tracks fuel cost convergence. Looking at the first 20 iterations, you see sharp, high-amplitude oscillations. Because the high demand narrows the feasible region, redistributing power among generators creates volatile swings. After 120 iterations, the optimal thermal cost settles at $811.40 per hour. The emissions convergence chart shows an early decline, repeatedly punctuated by sudden upward corrections in the first 30 iterations. These spikes occur when the algorithm temporarily favors cost reduction over emission control. Ultimately, it finalizes an output of approximately 1.25 million kilograms per hour. By the end of the simulation, Generator 1 carries the heaviest burden, supplying exactly 114.66 megawatts of the total demand. And because the model uses mathematical projection instead of artificial penalties, the final exact power balance error remains at absolute zero. Every required watt is accounted for. Finally, this chart shows the combined normalized objective. Despite the early volatility of tracking both cost and emissions, the curve eventually secures a flat, stable compromise in the later iterations. The algorithm successfully locates a stable operating point. However, without renewable inputs, the network maintains high operational stress across its thermal units. Now let us alter the search space. In case 2, the total system demand remains at 283.4 megawatts, but we introduce photovoltaic and wind generation into the network. The total renewable input is set at a fixed injection of 42 megawatts. This immediately reduces the net demand placed on the thermal units from 283.4 down to 241.4 megawatts. The model handles renewable generation with one strict rule regarding curtailment. If high renewable output pushes net thermal demand below the absolute minimum generator thresholds, renewables are curtailed just enough to restore feasibility. Curtailment is a safety mechanism, never an optimized variable. This chart displays the resulting cost convergence. With the thermal load reduced, the optimal cost drops sharply to $659.84 per hour. Notice the latter half of the search. Compared to the baseline test, aggressive cost spikes are practically eliminated after 40 iterations. Examining the emissions data, the final output charts a corresponding drop to 1.15 million kilograms per hour. To achieve this, Generator 1's output is scaled down to exactly 102.97 megawatts, anchoring the new net thermal requirement of 241.4 megawatts. When we combine that thermal output with the 42 megawatts of must-take renewable power, it perfectly matches the 283.4 megawatt demand. The exact power balance error is maintained at zero. Looking at the combined weighted objective chart for case 2, the curve demonstrates a noticeably faster descent and earlier stabilization than the thermal-only test. Reducing the thermal demand relaxes the competition between generators. With more breathing room above their limits, the feasible region expands, allowing the algorithm to secure an optimal compromise significantly faster. Placing the exact outputs side by side proves how effectively the algorithm distributes the required reduction across the grid. In case 1, without renewables, the top 3 generators were heavily loaded at 114, 57, and 35 megawatts. The remaining 3 smaller units provided roughly 25, 26, and 24 megawatts. In case 2, with the 42 megawatt renewable injection, the top 3 units scaled down gracefully to 102, 49, and 30 megawatts. The smaller units dropped their output as well, shifting to 17, 23, and 17 megawatts. The algorithm distributed the load reduction across all units, rather than concentrating it on a single generator or forcing units to their extreme minimum limits. This resulted in lower thermal demand, lower cost, fewer emissions, and a faster computational time. By combining the exploration power of a CEO-LMO hybrid search with explicit projection-based constraints, grid operators can secure perfectly stable dispatch solutions, even under the stress of dynamic renewable integration. For MATLAB simulation works, economic and emission dispatch, renewable energy integration, power system optimization, and research coding support, contact creativepublications2020@gmail.com.